Let me start in a grounded place. If you're listening right now and your life is objectively full, work, responsibilities, people who rely on you, yet something in you feels thin or unsettled, I want you to know what I'm talking about today in this show is not a diagnosis. It's not a label. It's a pattern, a human pattern, one that creeps in quietly, especially in intelligent adults who can carry a lot of weight. The word I'm using for it is drift. Drift is not the same thing as failure. Drift isn't necessarily rebellion, laziness, or a moral collapse. Drift is what happens when you keep moving, but you stop choosing. You still get things done. You still show up. You still do what you're supposed to do, but the why gets fuzzy and the who you're becoming gets ignored, and the days start to run you instead of you stewarding the days. That's a real tension, and I'm going to say it plainly. You can have a life that looks functional from the outside and still feel unclaimed on the inside. Most people don't say it that way because it sounds dramatic, and they're not trying to be dramatic. They just feel it. It shows up as restlessness. It shows up as a low-grade irritation. It shows up as needing more noise than you used to need. It shows up as doing the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and realizing you're not sure if you're building a life or simply surviving a schedule. Drift has a particular personality. It doesn't kick down the front door. It doesn't announce itself. Drift doesn't feel like an emergency. It feels like normal adulthood. That's why it's dangerous. It feels like this is just how it is. And because it feels normal, it can take years without ever creating a single headline moment. And here's the uncomfortable truth I want to put on the table early. And I want to do it without harshness. If you don't decide what matters most, something else will decide for you. That something else is usually urgency. Sometimes it's other people's needs. Sometimes it's anxiety. Sometimes it's money pressure. Sometimes it's the dopamine loop of distraction. What's easiest, what's loudest, what's closest, what's least demanding. None of those are evil in a cartoon sense. They're just not good leaders for your life. They're not wise shepherds of a human life. The reason I'm taking this seriously is because drift isn't only a spiritual idea, it's a practical one too. Drift touches money, time, relationships, and peace. It changes the quality of your decisions. It changes your patience. It changes what you tolerate. It changes how you treat the people closest to you. It changes how you treat yourself. You can live in drift and still look fine. That's the trap. You can function for a long time while quietly deteriorating. Now, I want to normalize resistance because I can feel it in the room, even through the radio. Some part of you might be thinking, I don't need another framework. I don't need another system. I don't need another thing that implies I'm doing it all wrong. That's fair. A lot of people have been manipulated by systems. They've been sold quick fixes. They've been shamed into buying courses. They've been pressured by leaders who used personal development as a lever to create dependency. Some people hear the word framework and they immediately brace for hype or performance. I'm not interested in hype. I'm not interested in theatrics. I'm not interested in turning your life into a spreadsheet that you can never live up to. The framework I'm talking about is not a tool for self-criticism. It's a tool for clarity. Clarity is not condemnation. Clarity is mercy. When you have clarity, you stop arguing with reality. You stop negotiating with what you already know. You stop waiting for a magical mood to appear before you take ownership of your life. You start dealing with truth in calm, specific ways. And that matters because vague discomfort is one of the most exhausting states a human can live in. When you're vaguely unsettled, you can't aim. You can't prioritize. You can't rest well. You can't say no cleanly. You can't tell which problems are real and which are just noise. That's why drift is tiring. It's not that your calendar is heavy. It's that your life doesn't feel anchored. Now, since this show is rooted in a Christian worldview, I'm going to say this carefully and simply. Drift is often what happens when your life loses alignment with your highest commitments. For a Christian or a Christ follower, that highest commitment is not just, I believe in God. It's the daily lived reality of walking with Him. Not perfectly, not performatively, just honestly. When that center weakens, everything else becomes more vulnerable to being led by fear, appetite, or pressure. For someone who isn't sure what they believe, the principle still holds. If you lose alignment with what you claim matters most, your values, your integrity, your relationships, your health, then your life becomes reactive. You start living based on what you feel in the moment or what is demanding your attention. The urgent fires of life. So this isn't a religious club conversation. It's a human conversation. Drift is a human problem. And here's why framework or a life framework matters. A framework gives you a way to see your life as a whole instead of as a string of urgent moments. Most people don't see their life as a whole. They see today. They see the next thing. They see whatever is loud. They see whatever is pressuring them. They see what's in front of them, and that's it. And listen, sometimes that's necessary. People go through seasons where you're just trying to keep the ship afloat. I know. I've been there. There are real storms in life. There are real responsibilities. I'm not denying that. I'm not pretending you can mindset your way out of pain or chaos. But even in intense seasons, you still need a compass. Without a compass, you can be very busy and still be going in the wrong direction. Now let's name what drift looks like without trying to dramatize it. Drift looks like postponing what matters because what matters doesn't scream in your life. Drift looks like your spiritual life becoming occasional instead of steady. Drift looks like your marriage, if you're married, getting managed rather than cultivated. I had a friend once say you're either working on your marriage or working on your divorce, one of the two. Drift looks like friendships slowly thinning because you only keep relationships that are convenient. Drift looks like health declining in small increments, not because you don't care, but because you haven't built any guardrails, any consistency. Drift looks like money feeling confusing or avoided because numbers force honesty, and honesty feels heavy when you're tired, when you feel like there's no hope, no way out. Drift looks like entertainment replacing rest. Scrolling all throughout the day instead of doing the things you know you need to do. Drift looks like you can't remember the last time you felt deeply present. That last one, feeling deeply present, that matters. Presence is often the first casualty of drift. People drift into a life where they're constantly half here, half listening, half resting, half working, half engaged, because their mind is always somewhere else, planning, worrying, consuming, rehearsing, scrolling. That's not just a phone problem. It's a clarity problem, and clarity problems create peace problems. Now, I want to bring in one faith reference in this segment, and I'm going to keep it clean and non-performative. There's a line in Scripture that is short and sharp. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. That's Psalm 90:12. Numbering your days is the opposite of drift. It's not morbid. It's honest. It's recognizing time is not infinite, and therefore your choices matter, not just your outcomes, your choices, your attention, your priorities. When you number your days, you stop acting like you'll eventually get around to what matters. You stop living in I'll do it later. You stop trading long-term peace for short-term relief. Drift thrives on later. Later, I'll deal with my health. Later, I'll get serious about my finances. Later, I'll build my marriage. Later, I'll reconnect with God. Later, I'll make time for friendships. Later, I'll figure out what I actually want. Later is not a plan. Later is not a date. Later is a fog word, and fog is where people get lost. Drift thrives in fog. So the purpose of framework is to pull you out of the fog. Now, I'm going to tell you something that may land hard, but it's said with respect. Most people are not living their life on purpose. They're living inside a set of defaults. defaults handed them by their upbringing, their culture, their fear, their wounds, or their responsibilities. And because those defaults are familiar, they feel normal, even if they're slowly costing you your life. A framework forces you to ask, are these defaults good? Are they wise? Are they aligned with what I claim matters? Are they producing peace or producing tension? Are they current for where my life is now? Or are they 5 or 10 years older, that prior version of me? Because outcomes are feedback. If your life is producing constant irritation, constant anxiety, constant relational distance, constant exhaustion, that's feedback, not shame, feedback. A framework helps you interpret the feedback. Now, let me introduce the structure we're going to use for the rest of this conversation across these segments. There are 7 pillars to life, 7 areas of life that, if neglected, eventually create big problems and massive drift. These 7 are faith, family, friends, fitness, field, fun, and finances. I'm not giving you 7 buckets to feel guilty about. I'm giving you 7 mirrors. Most people only look in one mirror, the work mirror, or the money mirror, or the health mirror, or the family mirror, and they assume that one mirror tells the whole story. It doesn't. A human life is integrated. When one pillar is unstable, one of those 7, it bleeds into the others. If finances are chaotic, your stress rises and your relationships feel it. If fitness is neglected, sleep, movement, energy, your patience shrinks and your clarity collapses. If friends are missing, you become vulnerable to isolation and distorted thinking and feeling alone and being lonely. If family is neglected, you can end up living next to people you love rather than with them. If fun is missing, you become brittle and you start calling numbness rest. If your field, your work has no boundaries, it starts eating the entire week and eventually it eats your peace. If faith is thin, you may still believe, but you don't live with the steadiness that comes from walking closely with God. These pillars aren't theoretical. They're where real life happens. And here's what the framework does that most people never do. It tells you where you're most deficient. Not in a vague way, in a specific way. Most people try to fix their life by guessing. They throw effort at whatever feels most urgent. They try to work harder or be more disciplined. They take a few stabs at change, and when it doesn't stick, they assume something is wrong with them. Often, nothing is wrong with them. They're just trying to build a life without a map. They're trying to renovate a house while blindfolded. So the life framework becomes a calm inventory tool. It helps you say, this is strong, this is weak, this is neglected, this is out of balance. Then you correct the right things, not everything. That last part matters because people burn out when they try to change 7 areas of their life all at once. It's too much to take on. A good framework doesn't turn you into a frantic self-improvement project. It makes you a wise steward. It teaches you to strengthen the 1 or 2 pillars that will stabilize the others. Now, before I close this first segment, I want to bring you back down to a quiet, personal conversation, just for a moment. You don't need to agree with everything I'm saying. You don't need to adopt my language. You don't need to join anything. But I do want you to answer one honest question, privately, without defending yourself. When you look at the last 90 days of your life, have you been living on purpose? Or have you mostly been responding to the winds of life? That question is not meant to accuse you. It's meant to locate you. If your answer is mostly responding to your life, I'm not surprised. That's most adults. It's also fixable. If your answer is, I don't know, that's also an answer. Confusion is often a signal that drift is present in your life. If your answer is, I've been living on purpose, then good. This framework will still help you keep it that way because drift doesn't only happen to people who are struggling. Drift happens to people who are busy, especially people that are busy. In the next segment, I'm going to define drift more precisely and show you how to hide or how it hides in normal life. I'll also help you see why smart, capable adults are uniquely vulnerable to it. Not because they're weak, because they can carry a lot without falling apart, which means drift can stay invisible longer. For now, though, don't rush to fix anything. Just locate yourself. Clarity first, then correction. If you'd like to take the Graybeard quiz, this life assessment quiz, this framework quiz that I'm talking about, it's free to do. All you got to do is go to thegraybeardshow.com and you'll find it under quiz, or you can reach out right now. If you want to get a downloadable link to take the quiz, then all you do is text quiz to 84503. Text quiz, Q-U-I-Z, to the following 5-digit number, 84503. We'll send you a link to it. So go to thegraybeardshow.com, or you can text quiz to 84503. We'll send you this 7-pillar framework so you can see right now 21 questions where you're at in those 7 key areas: faith, family, friends, fitness, field, fun, finances. Text quiz to 84503 or go to thegraybeardshow.com. All right, let's keep this simple and honest. Drift doesn't usually come from one big decision. It comes from 1,000 small ones you barely notice. The reason that matters is because most people keep waiting for drift to feel like an emergency. They assume if it was really a problem, it would be obvious. That assumption is what lets it grow. Drift is rarely obvious while it's happening. It's obvious in hindsight. It's obvious when you look back and realize a season passed and you can't really describe what it meant. It's obvious when you hear yourself say, I don't know how I got here, even though you've been living the same routine for years. That's the tension. You can be a responsible adult and still be drifting in all areas of your life. You can be a high-functioning person and still be drifting. You can be a good person and still be drifting. That's why I want to name how drift disguises itself, because once you can see it, you can interrupt it without drama. Drift often hides inside 3 very normal experiences. The first is fatigue. Not the kind of fatigue that comes from one hard week, but the kind of fatigue that becomes a background noise in your life. When fatigue becomes normal, you stop asking what it's costing you. You stop questioning whether the way you're living is sustainable. You start settling for good enough in areas that used to matter to you. Fatigue makes drift feel justified. If you're tired, it makes sense that you'd stop doing the things that require attention. It makes sense that you'd take the easier path. It makes sense that you'd keep decisions shallow because deep decisions take energy. When you're tired, you don't want to take inventory. You don't want to ask big questions. You don't want to examine your marriage, your friendships, your finances, your body, your faith. You want relief. So drift begins as a relief strategy. You don't stop caring, you stop engaging. And the problem is that relief, when it becomes a lifestyle, slowly becomes regret. The second place drift hides in is busyness. Busyness is tricky because it can look like virtue. It can look like responsibility. It can look like productivity. It can look like being needed. But busyness is not the same thing as purpose. Purpose has direction. Busyness often has motion without direction. A busy life can be a purposeful life, but it isn't automatically one. The difference is whether your actions are chosen or simply demanded. The difference is whether you're steering or being pulled. Here's a diagnostic question that doesn't require you to be philosophical. When you wake up most mornings, do you feel like you're stepping into a life you designed? Or do you feel like you're stepping into a life that's already chasing you? That chasing feeling, where the day feels like it's already behind before you even start, often means the center of your life is being defined by urgency, not by intention. Busyness becomes drift when you stop deciding your priorities and start only managing your responsibilities. You might do that for a season, and it's necessary. There are seasons where you simply have to carry more. You have to show up. You have to grind. You have to handle what's in front of you. The problem is when seasons become your identity. When you live like that for too long, you start believing you don't have a choice. In the moment you believe you don't have a choice, your life begins to drift by default. The third place drift hides is in distraction. Distraction is not just a phone problem. It's a pain management strategy. When your mind is distracted, you don't have to sit with the questions you've been avoiding. You don't have to feel the discomfort of what isn't aligned. You don't have to face the quiet reality that something in you is unsatisfied. That's why distraction is so powerful. It's immediate relief. And that's why it's so expensive and so pervasive. It delays correction. Drift loves distraction because distraction keeps you from noticing. You can go months without a single quiet moment long enough to recognize what's actually happening inside you. You can live in noise so constantly that silence starts to feel threatening. Silence starts to feel like something you have to escape. That's not because silence is dangerous. It's because silence reveals. And most people, if you're honest, don't want what would be revealed. Now, I'm going to normalize something because I don't want you to feel judged. If any of this is landing close to home, that doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. Modern life is designed to create drift. It rewards reactivity. It rewards consumption. It rewards speed. It rewards surface level thinking. It rewards being constantly available. It punishes slow, quiet, deliberate thinking and living. So if you're drifting, you're not weird. You're unprotected. That's different. Drift is often not the result of bad character. It's the result of no guardrails in your life, no tool to assess where you are. A guardrail isn't condemnation. A guardrail is wisdom. And that brings me to a deeper, uncomfortable truth. Most adults are not living their life based on a clear set of commitments. They're living their life based on what they can tolerate. And that's a big difference. Living by commitments means you've decided what matters and you order your week around what matters. Living by tolerance means you keep letting things slide until pain forces change. You tolerate distance in marriage until there's a breaking point. You tolerate health decline until a scary appointment. You tolerate financial avoidance until a crisis. You tolerate spiritual dryness until you feel hollow. You tolerate loneliness until you can't stand yourself anymore. Tolerance-based living is drift living. Commitment-based living is intentional living, living on purpose. And the reason frameworks matter is because they help you move from tolerance to commitment calmly and specifically, deliberately. Now, before I talk about the framework again, I want to show you a few common drift stories, things people tell themselves that sound reasonable, but actually keep them passive, keep them stuck. One drift story is, this is just a busy season. That can be true. Seasons exist. The danger is when you keep saying it, well, nothing changes. A season is supposed to end. If you've been in the same season for 3 years, it's not a season, it's your life. Another drift story is, I'll take care of it when I have more time. More time rarely arrives on its own. Time is not found. Time is chosen. And if you're waiting for a clean stretch of life where nothing is demanding, you'll wait forever. Another drift story is, I just need to feel motivated. Motivation is a spark. It's not structure. Your life requires motivation in order to do what matters. You will not do what matters consistently. That's not an insult. It's human psychology. Feelings fluctuate. They're temperamental. Commitments don't have to. Another drift story is, I've already know what to do. Knowing and doing are not the same thing. You can know the right move for years and never make it if you don't create an environment that supports it. Drift is often not a knowledge problem. It's a structure problem. And here's one more story that shows up in skeptical adults. I don't want to become one of those people who's obsessed with self-improvement. I guess that's a legitimate concern. A lot of self-improvement content is shallow and self-centered. But there's a difference between obsession and stewardship. Stewardship is calm. It's honest. It's practical. It's mature. Stewardship says, this is my one life. I'm going to pay attention. I'm going to live on purpose. Obsession says, I'm never enough, so I'm going to keep trying to fix myself. A framework is meant for stewardship, not obsession. Now let's connect drift to consequences, because this is where it becomes real in your life. Drift costs you money in more ways than most people realize. When you drift, you make financial decisions in response to your emotions. You spend for comfort. You avoid looking at numbers because they create discomfort. You procrastinate decisions that require planning. You accept financial stress as normal. You keep telling yourself you'll organize it later. Even if you're a high earner, drift can keep you from building stability. It can keep you from aligning money with values. It can keep you from generosity because generosity requires clarity and margin. Drift costs you time. Time is the most non-refundable resource you have. When you drift, your calendar becomes a reflection of other people's priorities and your own avoidance. You stay busy, but you can't explain why your life doesn't feel meaningful. You keep saying you don't have time for what matters, but you somehow find time for what numbs you. Drift costs you relationships. Relationships don't usually break all at once. They thin, they erode, they get managed rather than cultivated. When you drift, you stop initiating. You stop asking deeper questions. You stop creating moments that keep love warm. You become efficient and functional, but not connected. Drift costs you peace. Peace is not the absence of problems. Peace is the presence of alignment. When your life is aligned, when your week matches your values, peace becomes possible even with stress. When your life is misaligned, when your values are one thing and your habits are another, peace becomes fragile. Even good things feel heavy. Now, since this show carries an explicitly Christian frame, I'm going to bring in one biblical reference here, and I'll keep it clean. There's a line in the book of James. It goes like this. Anyone then who knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it sins. That's James 4:17. That verse is not meant to crush you. It's meant to clarify something. Drift isn't always about knowing. Sometimes drift is about knowing and avoiding. That avoidance doesn't just create practical consequences. It creates spiritual consequence. It hardens you. It makes you less responsive. It slowly trains you to ignore conviction. And ignoring conviction, whether you call it conscience or the Holy Spirit, doesn't make you free. It makes you dull. So if you're a Christian listening, drift is not just life got busy. It's also an invitation to return to a life of obedience and clarity. Not because God is angry, but because God loves you too much to let you sleep through your own life. If you're not sure what you believe, the principle still stands. Ignoring what you know is right gradually reduces your self-respect. That's not moralism, that's psychology. When you repeatedly betray your own values, you start to lose trust in yourself. Now let's bring the framework back. The reason the 7 pillars matter is because drift is rarely happening in every area equally. It tends to concentrate. You may be strong in your field, work is handled. You may be strong in finances, numbers are fine, but you might be drifting in friendships and you can feel the loneliness creeping in. Or you may be strong in family, present, responsible, consistent, but drift in fitness and you can feel the energy draining out of your body. Or you may be strong in fitness, discipline, steady, but drifting in fun and life is becoming joyless. Or you may be strong in many pillars, but drifting in faith, still believing, but no longer walking closely. That's why a framework is so helpful. It doesn't let you hide behind your strengths. A lot of people are smart enough to hide from themselves by pointing to what they're doing well. I'm providing. I'm working hard. I'm keeping it together. I'm not a mess. I'm not like some of those other people. All of that can be true, and drift can still be present, because drift is not about whether you can function. Drift is about whether you are becoming who you are meant to become. So here's what we're going to do with this framework across the remaining segments. We're going to use the 7 pillars as a calm diagnostic of how well you're doing in life. Not a scorecard, not a reason for shame, a diagnostic. Faith, family, friends, fitness, field, fun, finances. And in the next segment, I'm going to show you how to do an honest self-assessment without spiraling into either denial or self-criticism. Because those are 2 common reactions. Some people deny, they minimize, they say, oh, it's fine. Others criticize. They beat themselves up. They say, I'm failing. Neither reaction produces any change. The middle path is truth with steadiness. You tell the truth, you stay calm, you make one correction, you repeat. That is how intentional living is built. Before I close this segment, I want you to take 1 minute and answer a question that will reveal a lot. Where in your life have you been tolerating something you know is slowly costing you? Not the thing that looks the worst on paper, the thing that keeps whispering in your ear in the background. It might be financial avoidance. It might be a health pattern. It might be a distance in a relationship. It might be loneliness. It might be spiritual dryness. It might be a work situation that's misaligned with your values. Just name it. You don't have to fix it right now. You don't have to confess it to anyone. Just name it, honestly. That's the first interruption of drift, clarity. In the next segment, we'll take that clarity and turn it into a practical framework you can actually use without hype, without pressure, and without turning your life into a performance. For now, stay steady. Don't run. Don't numb. Don't dramatize. Just tell the truth. And if you're interested in taking the Graybeard 7 quiz, this life framework quiz, 21 questions to tell you how you're doing in those 7 key pillars, here's all you need to do. Go to thegraybeardshow.com, my website, thegraybeardshow.com. At the top, look under quiz. You'll see it. We've got one for business owners and we've got one for life, just life quiz. So go there, or if you're interested, if you'd like to get a ready example of it right now, text quiz, Q-U-I-Z, to 84503. That 5-digit number, you can reach out to us. We'll send you a link to the quiz. You can take it now. Text quiz, no cost, free of charge. Just take this life assessment. See how you're doing. Text quiz to 84503 or go visit thegraybeardshow.com. Let me steady us again before we go deeper. What we're doing in this segment is not inspirational and it's not theoretical. This is the structural center of the conversation. If drift is the problem, this framework is the instrument that helps you see where drift is coming from and why it keeps returning. Without this, everything else turns into advice you try to remember instead of wisdom you actually live by. Most people do not lack effort. They lack balance. Not balance in the sense of everything being equal, but balance in the sense that nothing essential is being neglected. A life can look busy and productive and still be deeply unbalanced. And when a life is unbalanced long enough, drift is inevitable. Here's the uncomfortable truth that makes a framework necessary. You can be strong in one area of life and slowly deteriorating in another. And the strength masks the weakness. The strong area keeps you functional. It keeps you respectable. It keeps you from asking harder questions. Over time, that imbalance doesn't stay contained. It spreads. It spills over. This is how people end up confused about why they feel off, even though nothing is technically wrong. A framework interrupts that confusion. It gives you a way to see your life as a whole instead of constantly reacting to the loudest part of it. Now, I want to normalize resistance again because this is the point where thoughtful, capable adults often push back internally. Some part of you may be thinking, life isn't that neat. You can't break it into categories, or this feels like oversimplifying something complex. Life is complex. That's exactly why you need a way to organize attention. A framework does not reduce the complexity of life. It gives you a reference point inside that complexity. It's the difference between wandering through unfamiliar terrain and having a map that doesn't tell you everything, but tells you enough to keep you from getting lost. What most people do instead is manage whatever is demanding attention right now. They manage stress, they manage schedules, they manage crisis, they manage emotions, and after they've already overflowed. What they don't manage is balance. And when balance is off, managing symptoms never really works. The framework we're using is built around 7 pillars because these are the load-bearing areas of a human life. When one of these pillars weakens, pressure shifts to the others. When 2 or 3 weaken, drift accelerates. Faith, family, friends, fitness, field, fun, finances. I'm going to walk through each one again, but more deliberately because this is where the weight of the framework lives. Faith comes first because it sets orientation. In a Christian worldview, faith is not something you add to life. It is what life rests on. Faith answers the deepest questions you carry, whether you acknowledge them or not. Questions about meaning, about accountability, about guilt and forgiveness, about suffering, about control, about hope. When faith is strong, it gives stability to everything else. When faith is weak, the rest of life becomes more vulnerable to fear, pressure, and appetite. Not immediately, gradually. An unbalanced faith pillar doesn't always look like disbelief. Often it looks like belief without practice, conviction without rhythm, agreement without obedience. Over time, that creates spiritual drift, even if you still say the right things. Family is next because it's where your life is most exposed. Family reveals balance more honestly than almost anything else. You can perform well in public and still be distant at home. You can provide materially and still be absent emotionally. You can be reliable and still be unavailable. When the family pillar is unbalanced, closeness erodes quietly. The house still functions, but warmth fades. Conversations shorten. Presence becomes partial. Everyone adjusts, but something essential is missing. Something feels off. Friends come next because isolation is one of the most underestimated threats to a balanced life. Friendships is not a luxury for younger years. It is a stabilizing force for adulthood. Friends provide perspective you cannot generate on your own. They see patterns you miss. They interrupt distorted thinking. They remind you who you are outside of your roles. When the friends pillar is unbalanced, life becomes narrower. You carry everything yourself. Your thinking loops get tighter. You lose places where honesty feels safe. Over time, loneliness creeps in, and not necessarily the loud kind, but the quiet kind that drains joy. Fitness follows because your body determines capacity. Energy, sleep, strength, and stress regulation shape how you experience life. They affect patience, decision-making, emotional range, and resilience. A body under constant strain makes everything harder. An unbalanced fitness pillar doesn't actually collapse all at once. It declines in small increments. Less movement, worse sleep, higher inflammation, more coping behaviors. Each change feels manageable on its own, but the accumulation changes who you are. Field, your work, vocation, or calling is next. Field is where you spend a significant portion of your waking life. It's where you exchange time for provision and meaning. Work itself is not the problem. The problem is imbalance. An unbalanced field pillar shows up when work crowds out everything else, when boundaries disappear, when identity becomes tied exclusively to output, or when a resentment grows because your work no longer reflects your values. A person can be successful in work and deeply unbalanced in life. Fun is often the most misunderstood pillar. Fun is not irresponsibility. It is renewal. It is delight that restores rather than numbs. It is enjoyment that makes you feel human instead of mechanical. When the fun pillar is unbalanced, life becomes all duty and no joy. People don't usually notice this at first. They tell themselves they'll rest later. Eventually, later never comes, and they begin escaping instead of resting. That's not because they're weak. It's because joy has been starved. Finances complete the framework because money touches every other pillar. Money represents stored time and stored choices. It reflects fear, trust, discipline, generosity, and avoidance. When finances are unbalanced, stress increases everywhere else. Relationships feel tighter. Decisions feel heavier. Peace feels conditional. Financial imbalance doesn't require poverty. It can exist at any income level. It often shows up as avoidance, vague anxiety, or constant pressure without clarity. Now, when you place all 7 pillars side by side, something important happens. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And you start asking, where is my life unbalanced? That shift is crucial. Unbalance is correctable. Character attacks are not helpful. Most people don't change because they treat imbalance as a personal flaw instead of a structural problem. They criticize themselves instead of adjusting their life. A framework reframes the problem. Now let's talk about how the framework actually works in practice, because theory without use is noise. The first step is assessment. Assessment is not judgment. It's just an observation. You take each pillar and you evaluate it honestly. We have 3 to 4 questions in each category that help you to do that. Many people use a simple scale from 1 to 10. 1 means fragile or neglected. 10 means strong and steady. The numbers themselves don't matter. What matters is honesty. After the assessment, you look for patterns. You look for the lowest pillars because that's where drift is likely beginning. You look for imbalance, areas that are very strong next to areas that are very weak. Those contrasts usually create the most internal friction in your life. You also look for the pillar that is absorbing the most energy. Sometimes one pillar becomes dominant and starts compensating for others. Work often does this. So does control through fitness or money. The framework reveals where balance has been lost. Now, one note, I want to caution you about two mistakes people make at this stage. The first is denial. Denial sounds like minimizing. Oh, it's not that bad. Other people have it worse. I'll deal with it later. Denial protects comfort in the short term, but increases cost over time. The second mistake is self-attack. Self-attack turns the framework into a weapon. I can't get my life together. I always fall behind. I should be better than this. That voice doesn't restore balance. It destabilizes it further. The middle path is calm truth. You tell the truth about where your life is unbalanced without drama, without excuses. Then you choose one place to restore balance. Not everything, one place. This is where wisdom replaces urgency. Now, one biblical reference in this segment, and I'll keep it grounded. In 1 Corinthians 14:40, there's a simple instruction. Let all things be done decently and in order. This is not about control, it's about order. Order is what allows life to function under pressure. Order is what allows freedom without chaos. Balance is a form of order. When life loses balance, disorder spreads. When balance is restored, pressure becomes manageable. Now let's connect this framework to real-world consequences because imbalance and balance only matters if it changes lives exponentially. When balance improves, money decisions become clearer and less emotional. When balance improves, time stops feeling constantly scarce because priorities are clearer. When balance improves, relationships become warmer because energy and attention return. When balance improves, stress becomes something you carry, not something that carries you. When balance improves, faith becomes lived instead of theoretical. The goal here is not a perfect life. No such thing. The goal is a balanced life, lived on purpose. A balanced life can absorb difficulty without collapsing. It can endure seasons of pressure without losing direction. It can grow without frantic effort. Before we move to the last segment, I want to bring this back to you quietly. You don't need to overhaul your life. You don't need to impress anyone. You don't need to fix all 7 pillars. What you need is honesty about where your life is unbalanced and courage to begin restoring balance in that one place. So take a moment and consider this. Right now, before taking any assessment, before grading yourself in any way, which 2 pillars feel most unbalanced right now? Faith, family, friends, fitness, field, fun, finances. And which one, if brought back into balance even slightly, would give you the greatest sense of relief? That pillar is your starting point. In the next segment, I'll guide you through how to assess the pillars carefully and choose the kind of correction that restores balance without creating new pressure. I'll also share how this framework changed my life. For now, stay steady. Balance is not achieved by force. It's restored by attention. And if you're interested in taking the Graybeard 7 quiz, this quiz on how you're doing in those 7 key areas of life, faith, family, friends, fitness, field, fun, finances, this quiz is easy to take, free of charge. You can find it at thegraybeardshow.com. Or if you want to get it right now, we can text the quiz to you, and you can text quiz, Q-U-I-Z, that word, 4 letters, quiz, to 84503. Text that into your cell phone like it's a contact for me. Let's say you met me on the street, and instead of me giving you my 10-digit phone number, I gave you a 5-digit number. That's 84503. Text quiz to 84503 if you'd like to take this life assessment quiz I've been talking about, or go to thegraybeardshow.com and look under quiz. You'll find it there. I want to slow this all the way down now because this final segment is personal. Up to this point, I've talked about drift, balance, and the value of a life framework in a measured way. I've done that on purpose. I didn't want to turn this into theory or advice that floats above real life. But in this segment, I need to tell you what happened when I used this assessment myself at a time when, from the outside, my life looked like it was working. This wasn't a season of failure. It was a season of success. And that's exactly why it almost took me out. This was 2015. I was in my peak years as a financial advisor, long before solar, long before coaching. I was making more money than I ever had. I was close to $2 million a year in revenue. On paper, that sounds impressive. What people didn't see was that I had built a machine that required about $75,000 a month just to keep breathing. Every month started at zero. That meant constant pressure. Commission pressure, performance pressure, time pressure, the weight of carrying other people's salaries, and I carried it every day. From the outside, people thought I was crushing it. Nice house, nice cars, lifestyle that looked successful by every worldly standard. Inside, I was being crushed by the weight of it. That was the silent part, the part no one sees when they look at numbers. What I want you to hear clearly is this: money was not the problem. Imbalance was. My finances were strong. My field, my work was strong. Almost everything else was weak. My weight had gone up about 40 pounds. I didn't take the time to plan meals or work out. Everything became convenience, fast, easy, whatever kept me moving. My body paid the price. My faith suffered. I started sacrificing Sundays to write radio shows and keep the machine moving. I worked weekends because that $75,000 monthly burden didn't care what day it was. I had created something that owned me. My joy was gone, completely gone. I didn't realize it at first because joy leaves quietly. You don't notice it missing until you can't remember the last time you laughed deeply. Fun was gone. Friends were almost gone. Fitness was gone. Faith was thinner than I wanted to admit. What showed up first wasn't a dramatic breakdown. It was weight, numbness, a constant pressure that sat on my chest every day, loss of joy, exhaustion, spiritual dryness. Every day felt the same, like Groundhog Day. Wake up, grind, carry the pressure, go to bed, repeat. No creativity, no relief, no sense of upside. It felt like I was permanently climbing Mount Everest and never getting closer to the top. That imbalance, it showed up in my mood. If you imagine a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being blowing my lid, I lived at 7 or 8 all the time. That meant anything small could push me over the edge, and that's exactly what happened at home. My wife or one of my kids would do something small, and because I was already carrying so much pressure, I'd go from 8 to 10 in a second. They weren't the problem. I was the problem. The situation was the problem, but they felt it. I was irritable, impatient, short with people. People felt like obstacles instead of human beings. Time became everything, and I never had enough of it. There was a moment when it became clear this wasn't sustainable. It crept in slowly, but then it got loud, not emotional, clear. I remember thinking, this job is going to kill me. I genuinely believed I was headed towards a heart attack or a stroke if nothing changed. Here's the part that matters. I didn't know how to change. I knew I needed to. I just didn't have a way to see my life clearly enough to know where to start. That's when someone walked me through this kind of assessment. I didn't invent it. I didn't come up with it on my own. Someone else had used it, and it helped them change their life. They walked me through it with care, not judgment. By that point, I wasn't resistant. I had reached a place I talk about often now. I was tired of the stink of my own stench. People didn't change. People don't change until they get there. I was there. When I did the assessment, honestly, the results were sobering. Faith and finances looked strong on the surface, but even faith wasn't healthy as I thought. Fun was a 0. Friends were very low. Fitness was very low. Balance was gone. The category that surprised me the most was fun. It's the easiest thing to sacrifice because it doesn't scream. You don't realize it's missing until you notice you haven't laughed deeply in months or years. I was brutally honest in that assessment because I was ready. There was no way to spin it. My life, despite the money, was in shambles. The cost of that imbalance was real. It affected my marriage. I was physically present but mentally absent. It cost me time with my kids at an age when they needed me the most. Some of that cost is still felt. My health declined. My faith drifted. I stopped going to church even though God had shown up powerfully in my life years earlier. I got busy. I got distracted. I had to face the fact that if I didn't change, I wasn't going to make it. So I corrected 2 pillars first, faith and fitness. Everything flows from faith, and without health, none of the money mattered. What good is success if you die early? I set boundaries, real ones. I changed my schedule. I changed how I ate. I changed how I moved my body. I created rhythms. I made decisions that felt uncomfortable because comfort was killing me. The most uncomfortable thing I did was look in the mirror, literally and figuratively. I had stopped looking in the mirror. I'd stopped doing that because I didn't like what I saw. My relationship with God changed in that season. I asked for forgiveness. I repented. I surrendered. I listened. I returned to church. I remembered what mattered. There wasn't a specific verse that anchored me. What anchored me was honesty. And here's something important. I felt the difference almost immediately. Doing this framework, taking this assessment, it was almost immediate. Not because everything changed overnight, but because action replaces avoidance. It was like being lost in a forest and suddenly seeing your location on a map. Hope returned instantly, not emotional hope, practical hope. I could see a way out. What changed internally before anything else was this. I admitted my life wasn't going as well as people thought or as well as I pretended. My income didn't change, but my definition of success sure did. I stopped believing money was the measure. If someone is wealthy but divorced multiple times, overweight, angry, and dies early, how successful were they really? Success became being a good husband, a present father, a man of faith, a leader who treats people well, a person whose life works, not just their bank account. If I hadn't done that assessment, I would have broken. I wouldn't be here. That's why I trust this framework, not as theory, as lived wisdom. It works the same way gravity works. You don't believe in it, you just experience it. So here's why I'm inviting you to take this assessment yourself. Because the pressure you're feeling, the dread, the restlessness, the sense that something is off, it can be relieved faster than you think. You don't have to wait for collapse. You don't have to blow your life up. You don't have to lose everything to change. You need clarity. This assessment gives you clarity. It shows you where your life is unbalanced. It tells you where the weight is coming from. And once you see it, you can correct it calmly. If I could say one sentence to my past self, it would be this: wake up. You've got it wrong. You're focused on the wrong things. You are already wealthy and successful, and it has nothing to do with money. That's what I would tell my old version of myself. I had forgotten how blessed I was. I don't want you to forget. Take the assessment, tell the truth, restore balance quietly, deliberately before drift costs you more than it already has. And you can take that assessment. You can go to our website, thegraybeardshow.com. Go there. You can look under quiz right at the top. You can take that quiz. There's a work version, a business version, and a life version. Or if you want to get it right now, we can send you your version of the quiz free of charge. No angles here. Just text quiz to 84503. Text that on your phone. Go to your texting app, key in the number 84503, then just give me 4 letters. QUIZ. Take the assessment. It changed my life. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be talking to you. I wouldn't be encouraging you and inviting you to take this assessment if I hadn't done it myself. It is something that works. It is powerful. And it can definitely change your life. It's something I think you should take and explore. And rest assured, my friends, I'll be back here same time, same place next week to talk more about life. Graybeard out. This is The Graybeard Show.
The Graybeard Show.
Learn.
Build.
Grow.